Hello, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us on today's webinar, Preparing for the Internet of Things in Field Service, brought to you by Technology Services Industry Association and sponsored by ServiceMax. My name is Inga Triago, your moderator for today. Before we get started, we just have a few housekeeping items. Audio is routed through your computer speakers. If you encounter audio quality or technical issues, let us know right away via the questions panel. You may access full screen view via the toggle button located at the top right area of the console. We do encourage you to ask questions at any time via the questions panel. If you don't get to your question today, we will follow up with you via email. And finally, a link to the recorded version of today's webinar and the PDF of the presentation will be sent out in the next 24 hours via email. Once again, thank you for joining us today. I would now like to introduce our presenters today, John Ragsdale, VP Research Technology and Social for TSIA, and Jeremy Frank, Director of Content Marketing for ServiceMax. We do have a lot of exciting material to share in the next 30 minutes, so let's go ahead and get started by turning things over to our first presenter. John, over to you.
Thank you, Inga. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. Very happy to have you all here today to talk about a very hot topic, the Internet of Things, and how the Internet of Things is shaping field service. It's fascinating to me how the interest has grown in this topic. The first time we did a webinar on the Internet of Things was about 3 years ago, and at that time, the focus of IoT was so consumer focused. All anybody cared about was getting their refrigerator to talk to their microwave, and we only had about 20 people show up for that webinar. But for today's event, we've got nearly 500 people attending. So thank you all very much for making the time, and I'm glad that we found a topic that so resonates with our audience. So I thought it would help to kind of open with a clear definition of what the Internet of Things means, or at least what we're meaning when we talk about it today. And I pulled my definition from, of course, the obvious source of all information, Wikipedia. And Wikipedia defines the Internet of Things as the networking of physical objects through the use of embedded sensors, actuators, and other devices that can collect or transmit information about the objects. So as you can see from this diagram, I'm sure a lot of you have seen this, it's been making a lot of rounds in social media, that the experts are saying that some 30 billion objects will be connected to the Internet by 2020. So we're not talking about the web refrigerator anymore, we're talking about business-to-business uses of these tools, and so much, in fact, just about all of our business technology today, all the hardware and software that enterprises use are connected in some way to the Internet. And there are some great implications of this for consumption monitoring, for technical support, but today we're going to focus around use cases for field service. And I have a slide here from our VP of Field Service Research, Val Golovsky, was using this slide at a keynote he gave at our European conference about the role of the Internet of Things and what he terms the remote services continuum. So let me talk through this slide quickly. Starting with service efficiency, this is where most companies probably are focusing a lot of effort today, and that is using these connected devices to allow you to remotely reach out and run diagnostics on a product, detect some error codes on a remote product, and that is a great way to understand before you go on site to fix a problem what the actual issue is. So when you show up, you're armed with the right tools, the right skills, the right parts, whatever you need to do the job, which can be a huge boost to efficiency, things like time on site and first-time fix rates. Getting a little more smart with using the Internet of Things gets into process optimization, and this is where we're seeing ongoing monitoring of remote equipment, and this can allow us to not only get a better idea of usage patterns, but also starting to notice when things appear to be getting near failure. And a great example here is if you can detect error codes indicating a certain part is about to fail, you can automate sending someone out to replace that part or performing a pre-maintenance visit that is going to eliminate the problem and eliminate any potential downtime for customers. So that is starting to change the way companies look at process optimization, and also a lot of interest from hardware manufacturers in some new self-healing capabilities, that if it can notice a problem is occurring, either reboot itself to try to fix the problem. We're also seeing a lot of hardware being redesigned with plug-and-play parts, so even the customer can replace some parts if necessary. The long-term goal here is getting to the point that we've got enough data coming in from these connected devices to start measuring customer outcomes. And one of the hot discussion areas here is if we can get enough information around how people are using and consuming these products, we can actually start offering product as a service, which means that customers are only paying for the tool for the amount that they're using it. And a good example there would be some very expensive medical equipment that perhaps a small clinic in a remote area, today they can't afford that equipment, but if they were only charged by the number of times they use it or the amount of time that they're using it, that would help them be able to afford equipment that maybe they can't today. So longer term, we're seeing that the Internet of Things is going to start enabling us to better understand the value that customers are getting from their hardware and software purchases, and even being able to price purchases around the outcome or the value that customers actually receive. So we do have a number of TSIA members that are doing some very exciting things. I've got some examples here from one of our European members in the industrial equipment sector. They create big pieces of very complex equipment that go into huge factory environments. So obviously field service is a very big part of what they do, and because of the complexity of the technology, it can be very expensive to have a highly trained engineer specialist go out on site. So this one member has had some amazing success through automating, through remote monitoring, and through self-healing capabilities. They've actually reduced hands-on labor costs by 90%. It's a very impressive case study. And one of the things that they have done, which I alluded to earlier, is they can detect when parts are going to fail, and the system will automatically send that part out, and it will schedule someone to go and replace the part at the same time the part arrives at the customer site. So they're seeing that they've got 99% accuracy in automating the repair and replacement part process. But there are also some great opportunities on the revenue side. We're seeing that a much higher percentage of customers are opting into premier support programs that include remote monitoring and some of this ability to do maybe automating the pre-maintenance visits so that they can send someone out when they see errors starting to happen, so they can practically guarantee little or no downtime for the customer. And another thing with the Internet of Things is a lot of your equipment is becoming very interrelated, integrated. When something fails, it's sometimes hard to know what the actual failing component is. So we know from our benchmark that 70% of field service organizations are now offering some kind of multi-vendor premier service. So no matter what fails, they can call you and your technician can go on site and fix it. So that one throat to choke is extremely popular with technology buyers, so they don't have to maintain premier agreements with a dozen different companies. They can just pay you some extra cash to fix whatever fails in their environment. So before I turn things over to our guest speaker today, I'd like to give a shameless plug to our sponsor today, ServiceMax. I've always viewed field service organizations as incredibly strategic because they are often the only group in your company who has ongoing face-to-face contacts with your customers. They understand each customer's unique environment, and they have personal relationships with key customer contacts. But despite this, field service has traditionally been viewed as somehow less cool than sales and marketing or even technical support. Well, I'm happy to say that all of that is changing, and I give ServiceMax a lot of the credit for this ongoing change. They were the very first vendor to offer a pure cloud solution for field service automation, and they were the first vendor to offer a native application for both iPads and iPhones to support the entire end-to-end field service process. And now they're doing some very innovative work with their customers on the Internet of Things, which obviously by the size of the audience today is of huge interest to all of you. So with that, I'd like to turn things over to our guest speaker today, Jeremy Frank, Director of Content Marketing for ServiceMax. Jeremy, take it away.
Great. Thank you very much, John. Right, there we go. Thank you all for joining. Like John said, my name is Jeremy Frank. I'm the Director of Content Marketing at ServiceMax. My mission here is to at ServiceMax create useful educational content for the field service industry with contributions from field service industry experts, ServiceMax customers, and in-house experts here at ServiceMax. We publish a site called Field Service Digital, which is at fieldservice.com. That is sort of one of the very few online publications dedicated just to field service, and I highly recommend you all check that out at fieldservice.com. And obviously one of the topics that we are constantly hearing about and getting requests from customers for more information about and readers of Field Service Digital is the Internet of Things. So that's why we are here today. And just a quick 20 seconds on what ServiceMax is. I think John covered it a little bit. We are a complete end-to-end field service application, 100% in the cloud, built on the Salesforce One platform. And we offer a series of what we call field-ready mobile solutions across all mobile devices. And we call it field-ready because they are built specifically for people who are working out in the field, the technicians, the engineers. We optimize it for their use in the field. So if you like more information, of course, just go to ServiceMax.com. So why don't we go ahead and jump in here. So we're obviously here to talk about the Internet of Things. As John said, the Internet of Things might be one of the most hyped technologies in recent memory. But it's also one of the ones where I think we're already seeing some very real applications of it. And I think analysts and journalists and companies and end users all kind of agree that the Internet of Things is not just hype, but it is real. But before we get into that, I kind of want to just take a quick look at kind of where we are as an industry and where we've been. In the past 7 to 10 years, companies have been doing sort of what we call rethinking field service. And technology is really at the heart of that. It's become a very strategic thing within organizations. It's even become a profitable function or organization within companies. And a lot of this has been driven by the technologies. Companies have moved from the whiteboards and the spreadsheets, and at best, clunky ERP field service solutions to the cloud and to mobile, and that has really enabled these transformations and innovation in their field service processes. And that's really been kind of where we've been over the past 7 to 10 years, and that was a huge leap for our industry with huge benefits to so many companies. But what's next is kind of what John just talked about, which is this idea of delivering outcomes to your customers. Service becoming the product. Instead of just the traditional sales model of selling products, you're actually selling these outcomes, and that's huge. And field service and the Internet of Things are really right at the heart of this, and what will make it all possible. And I'll explain in a little more detail as we go into this webinar. For most companies, this is something that's in the future. It's somewhat aspirational, but we are already seeing it in some organizations, and it's definitely something that's going to become more and more ubiquitous. So, again, though, this is the future, and I want to sort of spend the next few minutes of the webinar talking about some of the things going on today or in the near future that you can start to think about and ultimately prepare for. These are areas where the Internet of Things is going to have an impact on field service. So the first one I want to talk about is how the Internet of Things will impact how your company builds products, services products, and sells products. And let's start with build here. Tesla is a great example of a company that literally built their product from day one with the internet and connectivity in mind. Everything within this car connects directly to Tesla, data being sent directly to Tesla, to the owner, And that's really a first of its kind in that industry. And there's so many different services that can be offered based on that information. And ultimately, this will impact how I assume most companies on this call have R&D or engineering organizations that are already have this in mind and are sort of planning the next generation of connected products. And this will ultimately impact how you sell the product, because you're no longer just selling a machine. You're selling a machine and a ton of data along with it that ultimately can help companies make better business decisions, understand how their machines are working, and that's really powerful stuff. And then, of course, this will transform how you service products, which is obviously why we're here today. So one of the most basic forms of the Internet of Things manifesting itself today is this idea of machine-to-machine alerts or an auto notification. And we're seeing this already a lot today. And this is, an alert comes back to the office, alerts you that something is up with the machine and you need to go fix it, but often before the customer even knows. We have a customer at ServiceMax, a company called Enphase. They make microinverters, which is part of an overall solar energy system. And they created these microinverters to alert them when something is wrong, when the performance isn't quite up to par. And they ultimately know when one of these needs to go out and be replaced before it fails, before the customer knows anything's wrong. So they're able to anticipate that based on these machine-to-machine auto notifications. And we're seeing a lot of this in medical device as well. And it's something that's certainly here today, and companies are already taking advantage of it. The next one I want to talk about is something John touched on already, but remote diagnostics and maintenance. This is huge for field service and obviously powered by the Internet of Things. You know exactly what's happening to your machines, and you can see it you can see it immediately when it happens. So that what the implications of this, like John said, is that a remote technician in the office can ultimately try to fix that without ever having to send a technician out, because they have so much data about what the problem is and they are connected to the machine. But sometimes things can't be fixed remotely, and a technician does need to be sent out. And what's really powerful here is that because you have so much information as an organization before the technician has been sent out, you can do two things. One, you can order parts that are needed to fix it. And like John said, that can even be an automated process and save millions of dollars. But almost more importantly than that is that the technician goes to the customer site with the knowledge he needs to make sure he fixes it the first time. He can talk to product experts before leaving the office. He can look something up in a product manual. He goes to the site with the parts and the knowledge he needs to make sure it gets fixed the first time. And we at ServiceMax, we've done a lot of research on metrics around field service, and we've discovered that this idea of the first-time fix rate is really one of the metrics that can have the biggest impact on cutting your field service costs. So this can really have this remote diagnostics and maintenance, and the impact that can have on first-time fix rates can really be huge for field service organizations. So moving on here to predictive and preventive maintenance. So obviously preventive maintenance has been around for a long time. The model today, for the most part, is usually that companies agree with their customers on a certain number of preventive maintenances that happen over a period of time, per year, per quarter. What's great now is that what the impact the Internet of Things is going to have on preventive maintenance is that it's really going to take the guesswork out of scheduling preventive maintenance. Right now, if you're doing too many preventive maintenances, that's obviously costly to you as a company, but it's also a disruption for your customer, because they obviously have to take their machines down while this maintenance is happening. If you're doing too few preventive maintenance visits, there's obviously the much increased risk of a machine going down. So with the Internet of Things, you can actually determine, based on the data you're getting from your machines, when preventive maintenance actually need to happen. So you're really optimizing that number of visits. You're not doing too many, you're not doing too few, and you're actually predicting the exact number. You're only bringing your customers' machines down when absolutely necessary, and you're taking the guesswork out and optimizing the preventive maintenance program. Again, that has huge impacts on costs, on customer satisfaction, and is really going to be a powerful thing towards getting unplanned downtime to as close to 0% as possible. So moving on here, number 5, equipment tracking. Now, I know this one doesn't sound like the most interesting, but it is huge. It's really an important thing that companies are going to get to do with the Internet of Things is not just tracking the location, but tracking how your machine's being used. If it's gathering dust in the corner of a hospital, being connected to those machines is really going to give you a lot of insights here. And this has a huge this has huge implications on revenue, which I want to sort of dig into a little bit here because it's really important. So if you know your products, you can capitalize on revenue opportunities. And if you don't know your products, where they are, what their status is, you're going to have a little bit more trouble doing that. So right here we see a product. Obviously, you generate revenue from selling a product to your customers. I think we all know that. But after the sale, that's when often the real high margin and ongoing recurring revenue can start. Things like extended warranties and upsells and cross-sells. I'm sure if I asked, you could add 20 more things to this list. But to ultimately capitalize on those post-sales revenue opportunities, you need to know your product. You need to know who has it, what condition it's in, what location it's in. If it's been sold from one company to another, you need to know that information. And if you don't know that information, ultimately all those revenue opportunities just kind of disappear. Well, there's another implication to knowing your products, and this is something that even happens before they're connected, and it's a big one as well. If you look at this, if you look at the acronym IoT for Internet of Things, the T is one of the 2 capital letters in it, and it's extremely important. It's your things, it's your products. If you don't know your products, then you're going to have a tough time taking advantage of the Internet of Things. This is knowing where they are and all the information about them. So this is ultimately the first step and one of the most important steps companies can take now to ultimately prepare for the Internet of Things is knowing your machine. So if you have 75% visibility into your installed base right now, bumping that up higher is essential to taking advantage of this. And then, of course, even once all these machines do come online, this becomes easier. But that base knowledge of your products is extremely key to taking advantage of the Internet of Things. I guess you'd call it the groundwork. And once you have that intimate knowledge of your products, I'm going to go back to what we talked about and what John talked about as well. You can get to this next level of field service and even of just industrial business models of delivering outcomes to your customers and making service the product. This right here we're looking at a GE locomotive. There was a time when GE just sold locomotives, but now there's the opportunity to sell the outcome, which is freight throughput, getting freight from one point to another. Because ultimately, companies don't really want the locomotive; they want the results of what the locomotive is providing, and that's moving freight from one point to another. Jet engines are another great example of this. Jet engine manufacturers are selling things like the hours of power or levels of performance of that jet over a certain amount of time. And that's really powerful stuff because, again, the airlines want to move people from one place to another. They want functioning airplanes. They don't necessarily care about owning the jet engine. And this really is the future of the industrial business model, selling outcomes. And the Internet of Things and field service is really at the heart of it. So lastly, I just want to conclude with one final thing, and I don't want to make this seem like an advertisement at all, but because there is so much hype and questioning about how real the Internet of Things the Internet of Things is, I want to put forward an example of what we're doing as a company to turn this hype of the Internet of Things into reality. We sort of wanted to take action and really create something real, and we recently announced this partnership with a company called PTC to join their leading Internet of Things technology, which is powered by 2 acquisitions they made, a company called Exida and a company called ThingWorks, which are really the leading Internet of Things enabling technologies. So to combine that with our field service technology, because like John said, while it's great to have, a toothbrush that tells you how well you're brushing your teeth and informs your dentist of your dental hygiene, ultimately the killer app, the killer use case for the Internet of Things is service. And I think that's a pretty agreed upon point across the industry. Definitely the most profitable use case we know of today. So we've created this integration, and we already have a product that we're able to show, because we really want to make this real and turn the hype into reality, and we're really excited about that. So with that, that's it for me, and I think John and I would be happy to take some questions from the audience.
Great, Jeremy. Thank you so much for a very insightful presentation. That was a lot of great data that you shared. So we do have a few minutes left for some questions. And first question, Jeremy, is what impact will cybersecurity concerns have on Internet of Things? Most customers are concerned to connect their assets to the Internet for OEMs to access data.
Right. Yeah, that's a great question, and John may have a follow-up here too. I mean, it's the same concern that we're having in our homes, and it's really a lot of that is sort of depends on the industry we're talking. I mean, like a medical device manufacturer is going to be a lot more concerned about that kind of thing than a much simpler application. It's as much of a concern as any other sort of area of connected anything. But as you know, there are billions and billions of dollars going into keeping things secure, and ultimately the market is gonna react to this, I think, and create some pretty bulletproof solutions. These were concerns even when companies went online with computers a long time ago. Was how are we going to keep our company secure? Well, we've had some breaches, that's for sure, but there's been a lot of really great technology that has kept companies secure to date. And John, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Well, what I would add is a lot of companies that are getting into this remote monitoring are trying to build it themselves. And I think that if you look at some of the off-the-shelf products, you mentioned Exida, for example, they're built with incredibly strong encryption and security that meets the standards of government in Europe and, a lot of places that even have tougher standards than the U.S. today. So it's really one of those areas I would really advise you to investigate the best-of-breed solutions. Because building it yourself, it's going to be probably an issue that you're going to run into over and over again. But I would also say that, I always use the old adage, convenience overrides paranoia. And though customers may be initially concerned, what are you going to do with this data? And are you going to learn too much about me? And is that going to give you power? Once they understand the incredible value of being able to help them boost consumption, boost the value they're receiving, and also prevent them from ever having an outage, they get over that paranoia pretty quickly. So I think there is a learning curve, but as long as you've got the security briefing so they understand that the data is encrypted, it will never be used outside of these support use cases, you're not turning it over to sales or whatever, I think that most customers are going to get over that pretty quickly.
Thank you, John. We do have time for one more question. Jeremy, can you discuss the products ServiceMax and PTC are working on at this time?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So basically, we're integrating what PTC is doing with ServiceMax. So what we demoed actually at our user conference last year, and sort of the first iteration of the product, is an alert coming from PTC's solution from a machine into ServiceMax, and ultimately creating a service alert. From there, that's when the work order and field service process starts. So that alert can either be directed towards a remote technician, or a work order can be created, and they can be sent out. The technician can be sent out to the site. What's really cool though is that we've also integrated a lot of the knowledge stuff that PTC has. So they've been working with manufacturers for a really long time. So we're also integrating based on the service alert and knowing exactly what product we're working on, or the technician is working on, we can leverage a lot of the really cool knowledge-based stuff that PTC has, which is also now integrated directly into ServiceMax. So you get to the site, you have the work order, which is based off of the service alert that came through their IoT technology, and you can even look at a video or a CAD drawing or CAD diagram to help you ultimately fix what you've been sent out to do. So we'll actually, over the next few months, we'll actually be showing some more of this stuff, and we do even anticipate having the product ready for public consumption before the end of the year.
Thank you, Jeremy. So we are coming to the conclusion of today's webinar. I did see that we did get quite a few questions to come in today, and just want to remind everyone that we will be following up with you following today's webinar. And also another reminder that the link to today's recorded version of the webinar and the PDF of the presentation will be sent out in the next 24 hours via email. So be on the lookout for that. Again, I'd like to take this time to thank John and Jeremy for a very informative and excellent presentation today. And I'd also like to take time to thank everyone for taking time out of their busy schedules to join us on today's TSIA webinar, Preparing for the Internet of Things in Field Service, sponsored by ServiceMax. We look forward to seeing you at our next TSIA webinar, and everyone have a great weekend.